Hi guys, and welcome back to Is It Worth It Reviews. Now today we are talking about really small pair of speakers called Blumenhofer Acoustics Mini. And Mini is really literal in this case. I hope this is pronounced Blumenhofer. My German is not all that great, but if I have made a mistake and you happen to be from Germany or just speak German really well, please feel free to correct me down below in the comments. But back to speakers themselves, these really have some qualities that because of which you should definitely consider them and think about them if your criterias for listening to the music matches what I'm going to describe that these speakers excel with in this review. So stay tuned and we'll talk about it. Now let's start with the pricing, and I'll tell you that these small speakers cost around 1500 euros. The price can vary a little bit depending on the finish that you choose, and there are several real wood veneers that you can choose from. For example, this one, as you can see, I think it's called Zebrano or something like that, really beautiful finish. And in this particular finish, these would cost around 1600 euros. But looks aside, let's talk a little bit about the tech inside of these speakers. So as you can see, mid-bass unit is fairly small, it's 4 inches paper cone. And yeah, that's just small by any standards. While tweeter is a soft dome one. And both of these can actually tell you a little bit about how the speaker actually sounds, but we'll talk about that just a little bit later. So if we turn it around, on the back you can see a really small bass reflex port, so these are bass reflex design, which is quite normal because from such small boxes and small drivers, we need some help with bass frequencies. And finally, below the port you can see binding posts. It's only one pair, so these are not B-wireable, and these are gold plated, and these are okay, they're functional. I would just wish them to be just a little bit bigger and easier to tighten firmly. Yeah, you can do it of course, but because these nuts are so small and you clench to them with your fingertips, they can hurt a little bit afterwards. All that said, one last final piece of technical info is that supposedly these are 88 dB sensitive. Now, I call BS on that, because I just happened to measure them in my room. I have UMIC 1 mic, and they're basically equally sensitive to KEF LS50s, or my Spirit Winds. Maybe like a half dB or 1 dB more sensitive in some regions, and I'm talking mid-range, but generally speaking, looking at the averages, they're quite similar. Maybe these are like 1 dB more sensitive, but since both LS50s and Spirit Winds are 85 dBs, I'll give 86 to Blumenhofer Minis. No way 88, that's just not realistic. They're just doing klipsch on us. So that out of the way, how do they actually sound? First of all, they sound mighty revealing, and their mid-range and high frequencies are highly detailed, highly revealing. Everything is so precise and high in resolution, and separation is great, layering is great. Pinpointing things in the soundstage precisely in their spot is again great. But these drivers that I've mentioned just before, paper cone, mid-bass and mid-range unit and silk dome tweeter, they're doing it in a way that it never feels sharp and edgy. It doesn't have any sort of metallic glaze or sheen or anything like that. It's just super revealing, open and upfront type of sound that actually has quite rich tonality and rich tone timbre. There's lots of harmonic overtones and harmonic richness in this sound. And that immediately made me want to compare them. And I compared them to KEF LS50s, to Dynaudio Focus 160, and to my own creation, well, by someone else's design, Spirit Winds. Oh yeah, you can not actually see this one, but you can see the one behind me. I'll make a video about these, but back to the Blumenhofer Mini. What I found out in these comparisons is that they are even more revealing and have more resolution than KEF LS50s, for example. Same goes for Dynaudio Focus 160. Both KEF and Dynaudio are great revealing speakers, but this one is even more revealing, more precise, and as I mentioned, it has richer tone timbre, richer mid-range, just more harmonic things happening, overtones, tone decays, everything is so clear and so well separated that both Focus 160 and LS50 feel a little bit blurred in comparison. And for LS50 being really highly resolving speakers themselves, when you feel that those feel slightly blurred and not as precise as some other pair of speakers, that means something. That's a really high praise for that other speaker. And Blumenhofers are doing it with ease. They're just outperforming LS50s in the things that LS50s are known for. These sound a little bit snappier, quicker, more resolving, they separate better and pinpoint a little bit better, while at the same time creating really wide and tall and reasonably deep soundstage. But all that comes at a cost, because you've probably noticed that so far I haven't mentioned bass and I haven't mentioned dynamics. Well, as you can expect, as your logic would tell you when you see speakers this small, these does not have much of the bass output. If you look at frequency response, official frequency response, it will say something like they go all the way down to 50 Hz or something like that. I'll put that on the screen. But in a room that's like medium sized as mine is, it's like 4.4 with 6.6 meters, these do not produce enough bass to actually couple with the room. The response in my listening room starts rolling off somewhere around 70 Hz, and it's slowly disappearing. Somewhere around 40 Hz there is basically no more output from these. And that translates into quite lean sounding speaker, especially because Blumenhofer Mini have a trait that's actually commendable in my book, that they do not have inflated bass response in the upper sections. Many of speakers have that bass around 100 Hz or 150, something like that. And many commercial speakers are doing that same trick, because when you have a small speaker that cannot go really deep, the only way left for you to feel that it's bolder and more bassy than it really is to elevate that region that it can reproduce. Many listeners actually are so used to it that when that is straightened out, when you have a flat response, we feel like, where is the bass, man? And now when you couple that to a slightly bigger listening room, such as mine, there is not enough bass to actually make this sound feel tonally full and whole. You have really great detailing, really wide sound stage, lots of resolution. You even have quite rich tonal timbre when it comes to the mid-range and highs. Everything sounds harmonically rich, but there is a noticeable lack of body and tone core. Now, I tried two things to get that right with these speakers. First one was just moving them closer to corners of my room. That kind of positioning elevated the bass response a little bit. It made sound a little bit thicker and fuller, But as it happens every time when you put speakers in the corner, three-dimensionality of sound suffered, and the precision and the layering ability, pinpointing ability that these speakers can do really well, actually exceptionally well, was compromised. So I didn't particularly like that solution in my room, so I've decided to join REL T5X to these. And I spent some time adjusting the settings. It was actually fairly quick and painful process because, as I said, in my listening room, these start to roll off around 70 Hz nicely and without much humps or anything like that, which meant that I can step in with a REL subwoofer and mix and match them really nicely without much trouble and problems, and I did that. And with T5X, these actually got that body and that fullness that I was craving for listening just to them. Everything immediately started to sound more wholesome and more palpable in space. Even the soundstage depth became better. Soundstage depth increased because if you don't know why is that happening, you should maybe watch my REL T5X review. There I explained in depth how bass frequencies actually improve sound staging. And that was happening here too. Everything felt a little bit fuller and calmer and deeper in terms of sound staging. And I definitely much preferred the overall tonality of these with a sub than without it. But if you are in a smaller room, if you have compromised space and you cannot get your speakers too far away from the walls and corners, this kind of bass response could actually be a blessing in disguise, because that way you would avoid so many problems with too much bass and just low quality resonating boomy bass that you would otherwise get with more bassy speakers in a limited space with limited ways of positioning them. And now onto the last part, which is dynamics. Now, when we have really small speakers such as this one, and I basically said the same for KEF LS50s, we cannot expect huge dynamic swings to be carried out realistically, because these small drivers simply cannot move that much air and go easily from really silent passages and moments in our songs and recordings to really loud ones. So when you are listening to small speakers such as these or KEF LS50s doing a really dynamic songs, there is some compression going on. They do sound dynamically flatter than bigger, more powerful speakers that can swing up and down with more ease and with more force. So basically, if you're a fan of big orchestras, classical music, that includes movie music too, and also electronic music, these will not bring dynamics and life to the music that you would expect. But on the other hand, if you're a fan of vocal music, of small orchestras, jazz, blues, country, just great vocals, few acoustic instruments, these are probably as good as it gets anywhere near this price point. They do sound, even with that music, in a listening room such as mine, they can sound a little bit lean, but adding a sub, like I did, completely fixes that. And then I had something which I would describe as really big, airy, revealing, and rich sound. Throughout this review, I repeated rich and harmonically rich and rich in terms of tone timbre several times, because it really is that way. These drivers really do make magic in that mid-range area. So vocals sound beautiful, and songs like this one It's just so enjoyable. I like listening to Billie Holiday, Ella, Leonard Cohen, Elvis, etc., etc. Music like that and vocals like these sound glorious through these speakers. Most acoustic instruments, guitars, trumpets, saxophones, all of this sounds really great and natural. But in a room that's not completely small, I would definitely add a sub just to fill out a little bit of that core and that body and make these sounds even more realistic and root them, ground them, so they appear more natural. So, as far as comparisons go, if you asked me, would you rather take these or KEF LS50s? I would answer, in a really small room, definitely these, because they are more transparent, quicker, airier, richer sounding in terms of mid-range and higher frequencies. But if room is a little bit bigger, it depends. Can you add a sub to these? If you can, then answer would once again be get these. They do sound richer and more revealing. But if the answer is no, for some reason I cannot get a sub, I just don't want to play with it, I don't have any money, my wife won't let me, it doesn't really matter. But if you cannot add a sub in a mid-sized or bigger sized room, I feel that LS50 would be a little bit better solution, even though it sounds a little muddier. But it sounds more wholesome. If you look to a spec sheet, it goes just a little bit deeper in terms of bass frequencies than these. But in my room, they could go deep enough to actually couple with the room, then room helped them. It elevated a little bit of their bass response, and LS50 sounded more full range than these alone without a sub. Then compared to Dynaudio Focus 160, I would say again, if you listen to these genres that I've mentioned, blues, jazz, country, lots of vocals, lots of acoustic instruments, I would get these, especially in smaller rooms. In bigger rooms, I would get these and add a sub, because mid-range and how rich and how present and really good it sounds on these speakers, Dynaudio Focus cannot match that. Focus 160 is more laid back, kinda mid-range retracted a little bit, but it goes noticeably deeper, it has more authority in the bass line, and it's more dynamic. It's clearly more dynamic. So if you listen to electronic music, movie music, maybe rock and roll, heavy metal, things like that, then I would say go for Dynaudio Focus 160, because they are more of a all-rounder. They do everything well, whereas these excel with vocals and acoustic instruments, but not so much with these dynamically engaging genres with maybe deep, plodding bass lines. They're just not made for that. And finally, I wanted to touch on the topic of pairing. So I feel that these would be best paired with electronics that you cannot describe to sound lean or analytical or harsh in any way. Because it's pretty much similar to KEF LS50s, but even more so. These are even more mid-range forward sounding speakers. And if you pair them with something that's harsh or too forward and lean, that would probably sound really lean, really analytical, and borderlining painful. So go with the gear that actually have some full bodiness and some juice to its sound. When it comes to quality, just give them the best quality that you can afford, best quality gear, because these, as I mentioned, are hugely revealing speakers. They're definitely a class above KEF LS50s. As I mentioned, LS50s sound a little bit muddy and blurred in comparison. They're not as well layered, not as well separated. These are just more revealing, which basically means that even if they appear to be small, and because of that size, they do not carry an insanely high price tag. Now, I know that 1500 euros is not a small price, but when you actually hear how much revealing they are, you'll notice that if you want to get a bigger speaker that's that revealing, you would probably have to pay twice or even 3 times the price. And I'm telling you this because if you decide to get these, feed them with the best possible gear that you can, and they will reward you with even better, lusher, more revealing sound, bigger sound stage, deeper sound stage. Because despite their size and limitations that come with that size, they have highly revealing sound and really high level sound fidelity. So that would be all for today, guys. Now I hope you liked this video. If you did, then like, comment, subscribe, consider becoming a patron, and see you next time. Bye.